My name is Marlon De Swann. I come from a village outside the borders of the Kingdom of the Three Stars called Nemberg. I haven't seen my mother or my sisters in years. One day they just up and left. My father would have been an old man by now. Hadn't he perished fighting gargoyles somewhere far away? I had heard the tales of his adventure many times while young. He was a legendary warrior and a commander of the Carmen Monastery. Thus, now I live with my grandparents, and don't get me wrong, I love them. But a young aspiring man like me has other needs and other things on his mind than living a calm, isolated life in Nemberg. If only I knew then what I know now. I am Marlon De Swann, and this is my story. I had begun to notice that strange people were occupying the streets of Nemberg by night. Their faces, always concealed by a hood, and dressed in black robes. They were preaching to people on the streets and inside the Moonbright Tavern. People had started to disappear, and everyone said they left willingly. People seemed so clueless as to what was going on, and it made me furious. How could they not see that these were cultists? How could they be so blind? One thing was for certain. If cultists were appearing here in Nemberg, and were getting this bold, just imagine their advancements on the rest of the realm. They were festering. One day I made up my mind. I was going to do what was my birth-given right. I was going to enlist in the Carmen Monastery so that I could slay those foul demon worshippers once and for all. The next morning, I left. I carried nothing with me but warm clothes and food for the journey ahead. I hiked through snowy landscapes with no roads or directions where to go. But I had a strong gut feeling that I was getting closer to my goal. I imagined myself walking in the same tracks as my father once had when he began his journey. After hours of wading through the deep snow, I met a dwarf named Gerzelborg. He provided me with a resupply of food and a welcoming seat by his warm campfire. He pointed me to the only way out of the mountainous landscape. The rough landscape and freezing temperature would surely have been the end of me had I not met Gerzelborg. The next land I entered was an ominous, bleak wasteland. I could see remnants of old ruins, but no sign of life, not even insects. I walked and walked, but this strange wasteland didn't seem to end. I remember thinking I was lost, until I finally saw a forest in the distance. I found an almost overgrown path that led me to an old sign with the word Carmen. After wandering the road, I found myself standing in front of a darkened town. The buildings looked nothing like the ones we had at home in Nemberg. They had a magical and mysterious touch to them. I had journeyed through snowy mountains and a barren wasteland. Who could even reach a town that demanded this much effort? I spoke to a drunkard at the tavern, and he managed to inform me that this was the final stop before enlisting to the Carmen Monastery. Every single person in this town lived here temporarily. They were all waiting for their turn, and for the men in the red robes to arrive and grant them an invitation to enlist. As soon as the man had told me this, we could hear bells ringing outside of the tavern. "This is it," he slurred and staggered outside. I followed. On the street, in the middle of the night, red-robed and hooded men called out people by name and handed out tickets. A big crowd of people with tickets started to form in front of one of the hooded men. He uttered the words, "Follow me," before he began walking. The crowd started to move, and so did I. We walked through a narrow passage inside the forest until we came to a coast. In front of us there was a large ship docked against the beach. In the distance, beyond the ship, I could make out the silhouettes of an island. Everyone boarded the ship. Luckily for me, they didn't ask for tickets, and the ship set sail for the island. Upon arrival, I saw it. A large red mansion with bright windows lighting up the dark night, giving a feeling of comfort. A well-groomed garden, giving a feeling of perfection, and the smell of newly cooked food, giving the feeling of home. I was thrilled. I was happier now than I had been for years. I knew that my adventure and my path for glory was about to begin. We were greeted by a guard at the gate leading us inside. The mansion was beautiful. Large, magnificent pillars stood proud inside the halls, golden details and interior that matched well with the red color of the Carmen monastery. We entered the guest quarters where we were presented with a great banquet of cuisine. I had never seen so much food in my life. People absolutely stuffed themselves and drank until they no longer could stand up. The waiters, dressed in perfectly fitted white shirts, brought out more food and drink in a steady pace. A bard started to play melodies and sing comforting, uplifting songs about the Carmen monastery. Naturally, people got up to dance and enjoy themselves. All the recruits, including me, were young men and women. Some were well-known heroes in the Kingdom of the Three Stars, but had chosen to enlist in the Carmen monastery because of their frustration over the growing presence of the cultists. These recruits were definitely not just common villagers, as I had thought at first glance. After hours of enjoyment, I felt that I urgently had to go to the lavatory. I asked the waitress for directions, but she eagerly tried to persuade me to wait. The next step in the initiation was about to begin. Paranoid about the fact that I had no ticket, I decided to sneak away to search for the lavatory myself. I entered hall after hall, each one larger and more majestic than the other, until I found it. This was the fanciest lavatory I had seen in my life. Time passed me by while admiring all the dazzling details of the room before remembering what the waitress had told me. I hurried back, worried I would miss out on the next step of the initiation. But, oddly enough, I could no longer hear the music echoing through the halls. It was remarkably silent now. I could hear nothing. I walked back towards the guest quarters where the banquet had taken place, only to realize the room was now empty. I could see a large wooden door by the end of the room and heard a crowd of voices conversating behind it. They must be in here, I thought to myself. As I walked closer, I heard people laugh and talk. They were definitely in here. Just as I reached for the door, the laughter stopped. It was replaced with horrifying screams. I heard women and men wailing in sheer terror. I couldn't believe what my ears were telling me. Flesh being ripped from the bone, teeth sinking into chunks of human bodies. It was a slaughter. I quickly shut the door and ran away in utter panic. I hid under one of the huge banquet tables and held my breath, even though my entire body was trembling in fear and shock. Minutes passed, and the screaming finally ceased. I could hear footsteps all around me. The next thing I remember was waking up in the morning. I quickly decided that this was my only chance to escape. I got out of my hiding place and rushed through the empty halls to the courtyard. I immediately heard a screeching and a chilling scream behind me yelling, "There he is! Stop him!" I quickly hid behind a large stone formation, only to observe a man sprinting for his life while pleading. "Please, no, please, please." The man fell silently to the ground, pierced with an arrow to the back. I witnessed how the waiters calmly walked up to the man, only to pick him up and carry him inside the mansion again. I overheard them talking to each other. "We must be quick. There is a new batch of fresh meat arriving for tonight's event." I cursed the wretched creatures that could go through with this unspeakable act, and in such a structured and well-planned manner. I couldn't imagine how many human lives must have been lost on this island. I could feel my sadness slowly turning into a fuming cauldron of anger. These creatures were impersonating the Carmen Monastery and were killing off great warriors like flies. They were preying on these people's goodwill to aid the Carmen Monastery in their efforts against the cunning cultists. I swore to myself that I would return to this island of death to avenge my fallen brethren.